Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're diving into an incredible historical event that completely shatters those sanitized, neatly packaged textbook versions of history we're so used to. We're traveling back in time to the summer of 325, to a city called Nicaea. And what we're going to unpack here is a gathering that literally altered the trajectory of Western history. It's a wild blend of fierce theological debate and raw, cutthroat political survival. So how did it happen? Well, it's a story of scars, of an empire, and a truly unbelievable shift in power.
Okay, let's dive into this, because the sheer premise of this event is absolutely staggering. We've got a Roman emperor, Constantine himself, sending letters across his massive empire, summoning Christian bishops to convene. Now, this alone is a huge deal. You have a Roman emperor personally stepping into a theological argument among Christian leaders. And he isn't just sending out casual invitations. He's literally deploying the official imperial postal system to pull them all together to settle a religious dispute. Imagine the utter shock of receiving that letter in the mail, especially when you consider what these guys had just lived through.
Section 1. The Unprecedented Imperial Summons, a Call to Nicaea.
To really grasp the gravity of this invitation, we've got to look at the historical context. Just think about this timeline for a second. It really highlights the incredible whiplash these Christians experienced. If you go back just one generation prior, being a Christian leader in the Roman Empire was practically a guaranteed death sentence. Move forward to barely a decade before the summons, and the empire is enforcing its most severe, brutal wave of anti-Christian campaigns under the emperors Diocletian and Galerius. It was an absolutely terrifying time to hold this faith. And then suddenly, we hit the summer of 325. The persecution has ended, and instead of a death warrant, these bishops are getting a royal summons. They went from being hunted enemies of the state to officially recognized consultants of the empire in just a matter of years. Talk about a total 180.
Section 2. Survivors in the Room. The Cost of Faith.
Now, let's zoom in from that macro, empire-wide level directly into the visceral, physical reality of that council chamber. The picture is staggering. You know, when we picture a historical council, we usually imagine pristine robes and polite, polished debates. But it's who actually showed up in that room that is so crucial to understand. Many of the bishops who walked through those doors were old enough to vividly remember those harsh persecutions of Diocletian and Galerius. Actually, scratch that. They didn't just remember it. They literally carried the trauma in their own bodies. Historical accounts tell us there were bishops in attendance who were missing an eye. Others were missing an arm. These men were intimately familiar with the brutal extremes of their faith, bearing the agonizing legacy of events like the famous 40 soldiers who were frozen to death on a lake simply for refusing to renounce Christ.
The early church actually had a very specific term for these men, confessors. Now, a confessor was distinct from a martyr. While a martyr died for the faith, a confessor was a man who had been viciously tortured for refusing to renounce his beliefs, yet somehow miraculously lived to tell about it. As you can imagine, they commanded this immense, quiet reverence. According to the historical accounts, when the council convened, Constantine himself was visibly moved by the presence of these confessors. He was looking firsthand at the severe, physical price these men had already paid for the exact same faith he was now asking them to help define.
And this brilliantly illustrates the dramatic, almost unbelievable irony of Nicaea. Barely a decade earlier, the exact same imperial machinery of Rome was out there ordering the arrests, orchestrating the interrogations, and carrying out the maimings of these exact men. And now? Now, in the summer of 325, that very same state apparatus is hosting a formal council, bankrolling the whole shebang, and treating these traumatized survivors as its most honored VIP guests. To sit with that scene for a second, it is a total, mind-bending inversion of the world order.
Section 3. Constantine's true motive, seeking unity.
This brings us to a really fascinating question. Why did the emperor even get involved to begin with? Well, the immediate occasion that sparked Nicaea was a fierce theological dispute. It all centered around a presbyter, which was like an early church elder or priest named Arius, who found himself completely at odds with much of the rest of the church. The debate was over a massive foundational question. Who exactly was Jesus Christ? It's a question that turns out to matter enormously, and it's one that the council would spend real, intense effort working through to find an urgent resolution. But as fascinating as the theological debate is, we really have to look one layer deeper here.
Why did Constantine really call them all together? I mean, was the Emperor of Rome suddenly staying up late at night, stressing out over the intricate philosophical nuances of Christian theology?
No way! The answer is simple, totally pragmatic, and entirely political. Unity. Constantine's primary motive in calling this monumental council wasn't theological at all. So the crucial point is that Constantine was looking at a fractured church, and he quickly realized that a fractured church was absolutely terrible news for a fractured empire that was already desperately trying to hold itself together. Constantine had both the immense resources and the strategic mindset to try and fix this instability by getting everyone into one single room. Ultimately, he needed social and political cohesion, and he saw a unified religion as the perfect tool to make that happen.
Section 4. A Changed World. The Legacy of Nicaea.
Let's move to and see how this builds. It's deeply worth noticing what this council actually meant for how arguments got settled from this point onward in history. Before Nicaea, a dispute might be settled by one bishop simply outvoting another in some local, regional squabble. But this changed the formula entirely. First, it became an empire-wide gathering convened by the ultimate secular authority, the emperor himself. Second, it was completely bankrolled and hosted by the state. And finally, because of this brand new structure, arguments were now being settled globally with the full backing of the empire rather than locally. The mechanics of faith and power were now permanently, officially intertwined.
Which leaves us with this final, truly profound question to think about. What happens to faith when it becomes the glue for an empire? The men who walked into Nicaea literally bore the physical scars of a state that had tried to destroy them. But when they walked out, they were partnered with that very same state. It's a stunning historical pivot, one that really forces us to think about the delicate and honestly often dangerous balance between deeply held beliefs and the pursuit of political unity. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I really hope this leaves you eager to dig even deeper into this incredible piece of history.